then they're finished. So that's just for the definition of finish, first of all. Then if we look at each boat individually, so I think everybody identified this. As yellow crossed the finish line, she hit the finish mark. And we obviously have this rule about touching marks and when you're not allowed to do it. If we flick to that rule, which is number 31, all it says is when you're racing, a boat shall not touch a starting mark before starting, a mark that begins, bounds, or ends the leg of the course on which she is sailing, or a finishing mark. So basically any mark that somehow is a boundary for the leg that you're on. So it's quite a complicated way of trying to encompass everything. But we see finishing mark is very much in that definition. You can't hit a finishing mark. Now, some people had a query about when you would be allowed to hit the finishing mark after you have finished. So we've identified that yellow has in fact finished. Does that mean she can hit the finishing mark and not break a rule? Well, the answer is yellow is still going to be racing until she's clear of the finish line and marks. So at this point in position 2, she's very much still on the finish line. So she's not clear of it. So she's still going to be racing. If she were to not have hit the mark and sail on into position 3 or 4 and come back and hit it, well, she would no longer be racing then because she would have been clear of the finishing mark and she could have hit it. That would have been fine. But here she's definitely not clear. So she's still racing when she touched the finish mark. She therefore broke this rule. And then I think everybody identified this as well. What should she have done really? She should have taken a 1-turn penalty for hitting the mark and refinished. Does it matter which side of the line they do the penalty on? The answer is no, doesn't matter. You can do the penalty up here, 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 wherever you like, as long as you then cross the finish line again and refinish. So that's for Yellow Pearl. And finally, Blue Horizon. Everyone spotted this was a bit of a problem, the course that she sailed. So this is the rule about sailing the course, which looks like a big, long, wordy rule, but it's really trying to say something very straightforward, which is you just have to sail the course as described in the sailing instructions and finish. And while you do that, you have to leave any mark that you're required to leave on a certain side, you have to do that, essentially. And the test, how we tell if you've sailed the correct course, is we imagine a string. This is what the second part of the rule is talking about. A string representing a boat's track from the time she begins to approach the starting line until she finishes when drawn taut, shall pass all the marks in the correct order and touch them. So if you imagine from the time the boat finishes to starts, you pull the string that was their track taut, what side of each mark would it hit? Well, if we look at Blue Horizon, it would be hitting the wrong side of the finished boat. So she hasn't sailed the course properly because her string lies on the wrong side. We've already said she has, however, finished, so she's entitled to a finishing position, but she's broken this rule. So she's sailed the wrong course. Therefore, to comply with the rules, she would have to unwind her string and refinish. So she'd have to come back and sort of sail back across the track she had and then finish, leaving the committee boat on the correct side, so that when the string was drawn taut, it would pass on the correct side of the finished boat. So everyone there identified she did not sail the course, so she broke this rule 28. Now on to really what was the crux of the problem. I'm super happy everyone identified this. We've said at the start, both of the boats have finished correctly, so they have to be given a finishing position. The race committee on the committee boat has to be looking for any boats that cross the finish line in that direction. If they do, they have to be scored with a finishing position. But we said they broke rules. Yellow hit the finishing mark and she sailed home. She didn't take a penalty. Blue has not sailed the course correctly. So even though they're entitled to a finishing position, what the race committee should do is protest them, or another boat. So there'd be nothing to stop blue protesting yellow and yellow protesting blue, or vice versa, whatever you like. But really the race committee should be protesting both of those boats, going to the protest committee. And if the protest committee agrees that that's what happened, they would both be disqualified unless they retired or corrected their error. This is a super common thing that we see, and this is really why we set this problem. Oftentimes, some race officers think that if you sail the wrong course or if you break a rule at the finishing line, you're not entitled to a finishing position. You can just be scored DNF or DSQ. without a hearing. But in reality, you can't. You have to score every boat that finishes with a finishing position. If you really want, and sometimes this does happen, your sailing instructions at your club can change these rules to allow you to score a boat without a DSQ without a hearing. You need to be careful you get the wording right, and I'll not go into that too much. But occasionally that can be done if you want it to be done. But it's not something I would really recommend. You should protest them, and then let the protest committee DSQ them. So that is really how the rules apply to that problem. Now, we did mention in some of the answers or some of the replies some world sailing cases, and we touched on it a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago. And I did just want to point out what cases are, in case you haven't come across them before. So World Sailing publishes this casebook, which is basically a whole set of scenarios, and it explains how the racing rules apply to them. And they tend to be very common things that happen, so that they can be explanatory. The link to it is here. It's free, so you can download it and save it on your computer. It's really just a handy thing to have if you're involved in a club protest or something, or you want to know how the rules apply to something. Have a flick through and see, has this scenario already been explained in this casebook? Has it already happened? And if you looked this week, you would have found that actually the problem we set is one pulled straight from the casebook. So this is case 128. And they helpfully tell you how the rules apply to each situation. So in each of the answers, we'll be giving bonus marks, bonus points, if you spot the case that might be relevant. So there won't always be a case that's relevant, but if there is one, it's always good to state it. These cases are authoritative interpretations of the rules, so you always have to follow them, and they govern sailing all across the world. So this is how we scored it. We'll send you a copy of this. We'll send you your marks very shortly. Everybody did very well. We were very impressed because everybody spotted all of the relevant issues. And as I say, most of the things we were looking for are, did you spot that the race committee can't DSQ a boat without a hearing, that sort of stuff. And did you spot one of the boats touched the finish mark and broke a rule, one of the boats didn't sail the course, and therefore broke rules. So we'll send this sort of model answer to you. So we did very well. So we're very happy with that. And here I can reveal the top 3 scores so far out of all 17 that have entered this competition so far. And we've split them up into professionals, so people that are already qualified judges, and those that aren't. So you can see it's already quite tight after 2 weeks. So we're going to keep going. We'll see how it goes, but well done for keeping up with it, and we hope that you find it useful. So now we'll sort of hand over to give you a chance to ask any questions that you like. I haven't admittedly been checking the chat, but if you'd like to ask any questions about this week's case, now would be the time to fire away.
Could I add just 2 tiny little supplementary points, which often come up and often arise and people ask questions. If you look at the definition of finishing, it's when any part of the boat crosses the line. In no way does the definition say that the whole boat has to cross the line. Mm-hmm. So it's perfectly legitimate, and especially in a current and light weather, to poke the nose at the bow of the boat across the line. You get a whistle or something, or a hoot from the race committee, and then to drift back onto the course side of the line. Okay, that's an important point. That the number of times I've been asked, oh, the boat didn't finish properly because only the bow crossed the line. And a supplementary one of that is any part of a hull, crew, or equipment in normal position. There is a case somewhere which, and it may be an RYA one, I'm not sure, that a dinghy that's capsized that crosses the line, it is normal for a dinghy to capsize, therefore it's in a normal position. So you can actually cross the line when you're capsized. And on the definition of, or the Rule 28, there's an important point there that will come up a lot of time, the difference between a passing mark and a turning mark, rounding mark. Mm-hmm. when you're sailing a windward, leeward, or triangle, or all the marks are both passing and rounding marks because you have to go round them. But when you're doing a lot of cruiser racing, you might use marks, for instance, because you want the boats to sail down a specific channel, but they never actually have to round the marks. So that's a classic in places where you've got quite a tight, Belfast Lock is one of them, I think, the cruising races. You don't actually have to round the mark, but you just have to go past it. And so it's important there to, especially for the race officers, to work out what's a passing mark and what is a rounding mark. And there has been a few cases of confusion over the years on that. So that's just two little points from the rules we've seen there, which will, and actually, technically, a finishing mark is not a rounding mark because you don't have to go round it, you just have to pass part of the boat between the two marks. So there you are. Okay.
Thank you, Gordon.
I'll now shut up.
Would anybody like to?
Can I just say that Chris's explanation of the two scenarios was absolutely 100%. I have absolutely no questions. And I note a bit that both boats actually finished before their infringements. I didn't put that in. I did see that, but I now know that I should have put it in on my answer because
I'm glad it's useful. That's hopefully
it is quite a salient point.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi there. I just wanted to, in my answer, when I emailed in, I said the race officer would give each of the boats a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the case of yellow, if you've given it the gun before it hits the mark, and it then goes around and back through, do you give it a second gun?
Mm-hmm. So I was just in the back of my mind going to say that actually. Thank you for reminding me. So in the rules, the hoots that you typically give at the finish line, they don't have any special significance. So when you give a finish hoot, it's just sort of a like a
testimonial.
The word is
Acknowledgement.
It's just a courtesy.
Acknowledgement
that you've got them. It doesn't actually mean anything.
Okay.
And very often at really big events, like at say Laser Nationals, when you have loads of boats going across the finish, it would be impossible. So really, that's up to you. It won't mean anything in the rules if you decide to do it or not. If if it's a big long race, and sometimes at our club racing, the race is quite long, you want to give them a finish hit just to sort of be polite so that everybody knows that you've seen them. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't really mean anything.
Okay. And then as a supplementary to that, if yellow is correcting his mistake,
mm-hmm.
Is it sufficient for him just to do a loop and go back through? Does he have to do a full 360 and then go back through?
So to take the penalty correctly, it's just one turn for hitting the mark. So it has to be a tack and a jibe in the same direction.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter where he does it. So it could be in position 3 here. It could be, he could come back onto the right side of the finish line, do it there, and then refinish. As long as he does the penalty and then refinishes correctly, it will be fine.
If he jibes where he actually is now in position 3,
yeah.
If he jibes there,
yeah,
and then he's heading back down towards the center of the bottom of the screen,
yeah,
and then he comes back around, he still hasn't tacked, he goes back up towards the top right of the screen.
I see.
And then he tacks and goes across the line. That's okay. He has done a jibe and a tack.
It does need to be one continuous kind of movement. So
okay.
Interrupting it because it's sort of doing a jibe and then sailing for a bit and then doing another tack, we won't normally consider that to be a penalty. I mean, if he rounds the mark really tightly and that is a nice one, smooth continuous movement, that will be fine. But yeah, he can't interrupt the penalty because it's handy to sail for a bit and then sail and then finish it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, Chris. Thank you very much.
No worries, no worries.
Chris,
Al, you're on mute.
Chris, with regard to the turn,
Yeah.
when he does his turn up here in position 3,
Mhm.
and then comes back across the line, surely he, if you draw a string, if you pull a string, he hasn't really sailed the course correctly, because he's left the when you pull the string taut, it wouldn't be a correct course with him doing a loop around that mark. I'm always confused by that. I thought he'd have to do a turn and come back through the line to correct himself and then finish.
So, no, it's a really, really good point, actually. So the string kind of ends when you finish. And if you, so this is yellow we're talking about, yeah?
Yes.
So if yellow does a turn here, comes back and finishes that way, the question is only, would the string lie on the right side of the finish mark? And
Okay.
in that scenario, you would have wrapped it around the mark, right? So it would be on both sides. That doesn't actually matter, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as long as it does lie on the right side, it doesn't matter that it also lies on the wrong side, if that makes sense. So doing a turn here and looping around would be fine. That he would have sailed the course properly.
And one of the other questions about this scenario is, for a competitor to protest another boat, you have to inform them at the earliest possible opportunity.
Mhm.
Am I correct in saying that stricture doesn't apply to the race officer, that he just has to inform them before the close of the protest time?
Yes, so normally what you would do, so there would be no requirement for the race officer to hail protest or anything like that.
Yep.
So in the course, absolutely right. Normally, what would happen in a regatta, if this was to happen and the race committee wanted to protest, they would write a notice on the notice board before the end of protest time. It is the intention of the race committee to protest about whatever, yellow peril,
Yep.
for breaking this rule. And as long as that goes up before the end of protest time, then that will be fine. That's enough notification. It's if you see them in the dinghy park and you want to tell them I'm going to protest you, that's absolutely fine as well. But generally, it's done with a notice and everything, as long as it's before the end of the protest time.
I think on my answer, I said I'd invite them both to retire before the end of the protest time, because inevitably they'll lose.
Absolutely fine. Yeah.
And can I just come back to the definition of finishing?
Mhm.
One of the things on it is that in its normal position.
Yes.
So if you were sailing, say, J109, and as you came up to the line, you extended your sprit,
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't be when you'd finish, would it? It would be when the bow would cross the line.
Exactly. Yes. So if you stick the bowsprit out or you let the spinnaker go or something, which is a way that you would not be sailing the boat normally, you're absolutely right. That wouldn't count.
And I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it's a fantastic story. To come back to the definition of rounding and passing marks,
Uh-huh.
there's an apocryphal story about a race from Kinsale around the Fastnet and into Cork. And the sailing instructions said, leave Kinsale, leave the Fastnet to starboard, finish in Cork. And one of the boats came out of Kinsale. They all came out of Kinsale and turned right and went around the Fastnet. One boat came out of Cork, or came out of Kinsale, and turned left, leaving the Fastnet to starboard, and finished in Cork and won the race.
It is true. You can, if the race committee does not, isn't careful about what they say, you can sort of use a loophole in what they've neglected to say by making it, that happens very often. The race committee intends to make something a rounding mark, but the way they write it in the sailing instructions just says leave this mark to this side. And as long as you do that, yeah, you're absolutely right. You will have complied with the rule.
Chris, why does that sound like that protest you had from the J24 fleet at Dunleary the other year?
Happened to me before, yeah, exactly. Yes. I don't remember the exact details of that one, to be honest. Try to forget it. But essentially, you need to be, if you're going to be the race committee writing your SIs for your club, you need to be very clear about what you mean when you say, if you say just leave this mark to port, then the string that we talked about, when it's drawn taut, won't have to touch that mark. It just has to go past it. But if you say round it, then it has to touch it. So you can kind of use that string to imagine what course you would need to be sailing to comply with the rules. And yeah, you can get yourself into all sorts of messes as a risk committee if you don't pay attention to that. Yeah, good points.
Chris Hall has been trying to get a question in there.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hal, you're on mute.
From it. The definition of finish is quite specific, and it does allow for a person who corrects themselves under Rule 44.2. Now, we have a situation that might arise where you've decided to allow scoring points instead of penalty turns.
Yeah.
And that's not 44.2, that's 44.3. So if you should touch a mark on finishing, and penalty turns is the rule rather than, sorry, penalty turns is not allowed, but scoring points are. Can you raise a yellow flag and take a penalty and take a scoring penalty, or is that then forbidden?
Oh, you're really testing me with that one.
Yes.
I haven't done it.
Yes.
I'll defer to Gordon on that one.
Yes, because it's the appropriate penalty for touching the mark is the scoring penalty. You have sailed the course. In this instance, you have sailed the course. You have finished.
Yeah.
But then you have to take the appropriate penalty.
But the definition of finish says she's not finished if she takes a penalty under Rule 44 or corrects an error under 28, which is the two cases that
under
we have.
44.2.
Yes.
Yes. So if 44.2 doesn't apply and 44.3 applies,
yeah,
she has finished. She will be scored. She will be recorded in that finishing place. And then her score will be the finishing place plus the scoring penalty.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just checking that it's allowed.
Now, if I can tell you a story about that, I was at a J24 Europeans, and Worlds, after 3 days, we decided that the penalty system they were using, somebody said not giving the right scores. We sat down, we discovered that of the 5 members of the jury, each had a different reading of the penalty system. It took us an hour and a half of argument to decide, have a consensus on, because the J24s is 10% if you declare it straight away, it's 20% if it's in the zone, and it's 30% if you don't tell the race committee when you finish and everything. It took us an hour and a half to decide how we should actually score, and that we had to revise all the penalties that had been taken over the week already. Wow. And the interesting thing was the guy on the jury who had been working with J24s for about 5 years, he said, I've never read it like that. We haven't applied that at any of the events that I've been at.
Yeah. Okay. And one other thing that just bearing in something that Chris said is that if you clear the line, and if you're sailing, let's say, into a strong current, and you should drift onto the committee boat's anchor line, for example, you then hit a mark after finishing. Are you then again going to be disqualified?
So
based on that.
Yeah, there's 2 sort of parts to that question, I think, if I can pull them out. A small thing, if you hit the anchor line, that's not normally part of the mark. So if you hit the anchor line at the committee boat, that's if you hit the actual committee boat, or someone on the committee boat sends you off, that would be hitting the mark. But it would all depend on how clear you got after you finished. So the test in the case that Gordon's talking about, it says, it was the wording that I used there. You have to clear the finish line and marks.
Yeah.
And that will be true whenever they're no longer influencing your course, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I think that's the wording that the case uses. So,
which in a big current and a low wind can be quite a long time. Yeah.
So the test for the protest committee would be to decide, was that mark no longer influencing your course? So if you had, been sailing up here, say, and then you drifted onto it because of the current, you could well decide that you had not got well clear because it was still influencing your course, and therefore you broke a rule when you touched it.
Yeah.
But hopefully you see the logic of what you'd have to decide, and it's hard to give a yes/no answer to depend on the fact. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense.
Ask
Okay.
another question about
Thank
about that. If you have crossed the finish line,
Hmm.
your bow has crossed the finish line, and we'll say there is a very strong current coming down it. Would you be entitled to start your engine and drive through the finish line? Actually finish the race.
You would still need, so you couldn't use your engine while you're still racing. So you have to.
So you're still racing after you've cleared the line.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Some of the questions here really making me think. That's brilliant. Yeah. So
It just shows the problem with the racing rules, which is very often written for the Olympics and dinghy sailing, but it applies to an awful lot of situations where all of these kinds of questions are quite common. You know, as soon as you're doing cruiser racing, for instance, the when you're allowed to put your motor on is a very pertinent question.
Any other questions?
Go ahead, Ross.
Comments?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the Kinsale Fastnet Cork race that was mentioned, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
And I just drew a little diagram here on a piece of paper. I'm not sure if anyone's going to be able to see it or not, but
Yeah.
did the rest of the boats that didn't go straight to Cork do that around the Fastnet? Because if the sailing instruction said leave it to starboard, then they should have looped around it like that if they were going, sorry, beg your pardon, if the sailing instruction said round it to starboard, would that be what they'd have to do?
I think so, yes. Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, but obviously the sailing instruction in this case didn't say round it to starboard, it said leave it to starboard.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So if you just said leave the Fastnet to starboard, then yes, just sailing away from Cork
there to there would be okay. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But if the
Okay, thanks guys.
then you have to go.
So can I ask a question? So I assume the yacht who just went from Kinsale straight to Cork won the race.
Yes.
We believe so.
I'd say he wasn't very popular in the bar, though.
I believe. Well, the story goes that he demanded the trophy on the grounds that he'd won the race.
Correct.
But I think he was trying to make a point about the sailing instructions.
But he would have to protest everybody, right? So he would have to. He'd make himself even popular because he'd have to protest all the other boats that didn't sail the course properly.
No, because they could have sailed the course properly by looping. If they leave the Fastnet to starboard by looping it, they sail the course correctly.
Sorry, other way around. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Thank you.
So in that case, would it depend on what the race officer posted on the board after the race as to if the race officer gave him his first place, then he doesn't protest, but maybe the others would. Whereas if the race officer didn't give him his first place, then he should protest.
Yeah. Well,
so there's at least one issue like this in every Dunleary regatta.
He wouldn't have to protest the race officer. He'd have to make a request for a redress.
Yeah.
Because he can't protest the race committee.
Yeah.
Liam, we had one like that at the ICRA National, didn't we?
Yes, there was quite a lot of that. There was a lot of people sailed the wrong course, I think. Was that in the Cruiser Zero?
The coastal one, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I finish off by asking then a slightly more complicated question? This might be ambitious. So if you were in this scenario blue and you've sailed that way and you come ashore and you look at the board and the race officer has scored you did not finish, if you asked for redress, would you be entitled to redress? Would you be able to get your finishing position?
Based on what you said earlier on, I would say, yes, you should be entitled to redress because the protesting procedure wasn't correctly followed by the race officer.
Yes, exactly. So does it matter that you didn't sail the right course in terms of that redress?
No, because you can't, the race committee, by disqualifying you, have committed an improper action.
Mm-hmm.
So you are entitled to apply for redress.
Yes.
Yes.
But surely as part of the redress hearing, if the fact is found that that's the way you crossed the finish line, then you haven't finished. So would the
So
redress hearing not say did not finish?
That's the
So
crux.
so that's the reason I asked the question. This is quite a tricky one. So the protest committee, if you ask for redress, the protest committee would have to find as a fact, you're right, whether you did in fact finish. And that would be, they'd look at this definition and say, did you comply with it? We've established that Blue Horizon did. She did finish, although she sailed the wrong course. She did actually comply with the definition of finish. So you would be reinstated in your finishing position. And it wouldn't matter that even if the protest committee agrees you sailed the wrong course, that would actually be irrelevant because it would not be, you weren't protested, you were just asking for redress.
Because it appears under Rule 60.3 A.
Does that make some kind of?
If that makes sense, you know, a protest committee may protest a vote, but not as a result of information arising from a request for redress or an invalid protest, etc., etc., etc. So in fact, you're insulated from being protested at that point.
So it doesn't matter that the protest committee finds out that you sailed the wrong course. If it was a request for redress that you put in because you weren't scored finished correctly, you will just be reinstated in your finishing position, regardless of the fact you sailed the wrong course. Another boat would have had to protest you, or the race committee would have had to protest you to take that away from you.
Case 80 is the case that is relevant, and case 80 says that a hearing of a protest or request for redress must be limited to the alleged incident, action, or omission.
Yes.
Although a boat must be scored DNF if she does not finish, according to that term's definition, she is not to be scored DNF for failing to sail the course correctly. So in this case, the issue is, did I finish? The answer is yes. So you have to be scored as though you finished. Whether you sailed the course is a separate issue that the race committee, if they want to do something about it, has to do. And of course, what will happen is they say, well, can I now put a protest in when they hear that in the protest room? And the reply is, well, yeah, when was the protest limit, time limit? Why didn't you put a protest in before the end of the time limit? Because we have, there is a right to, there is a reason for having protest time limits, so you can't suddenly start filing protests, lodging protests 3 hours after everybody's left the club.
Mm.
So in this case, what has happened on frequent occasions is we tell the race committee, I'm sorry, you didn't protest for the not sailing the course, so reluctantly we're going to, we have to, we fully understand why you're unhappy, but the boat did finish, you have to score him. And unfortunately, you can't protest for not finishing, for not sailing the course because it's too late.
That makes sense. Good, perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, didn't want to get too complicated, but everybody's answer was so good this week that I thought I'd throw
Gordon, that's why you're so grey from all these situations in the jury room.
Very possibly, yes.
Well, if you want some a little bit extra, it's just to say with the new rules, the race committees get a little bit more of extra powers in this area. Okay, and from going forward, it is likely that race committees will be able to have an additional score for someone that makes an error sailing the course and score them as what is now called ESC, error sailing the course. But hey,
there'll be a slight change to this from January.
Yeah.
And the rules change.
Can I ask one, just in the current context of that definition of sailing the course, and Chris, you'll probably know where this comes from. You know, our finish line in Carrick.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing multiple laps of a course.
Yes.
And the finish line mark, there's two marks close together. So you do a second lap, but you leave out what is notionally the finish mark, and then come to the end of the race and do cross the line. I've got this theory that as the race officer, you've only recorded a boat crossing the finish line at the end of one lap.
Yeah.
So can you just score them did not finish? Or do you have to, because you've only seen them complete one lap when everybody else has done two?
If in your sailing instructions you have said at the end of each lap you must pass through the finish line, so you have to do this sort of circle.
Well, it's a mark on the course at the end of the lap, yeah.
Then you would not have sailed the course but you would have. So at the end you would have finished because you'd have gone through the finish line correctly. You would have done one fewer lap than required, so you would have not sailed the course. But same thing, you would need to be protested. I think if I'm understanding that properly, based on what goes on in Carrick. So it would depend on what was in the sailing instructions, I think.
And the reverse issue comes in Dublin Bay, where very often they put the start-finish line in the middle of the beat, and some race officers really want boats not to sail through the finish line unless they're finishing. And unless they change they can put that in, but unless they give themselves the right to disqualify without a hearing, they have to protest the boats. It's the inverse. It's they want you not to sail through the line at the end of each lap.
Sorry, Gordon, I sailed in Dublin Bay, and I'm quite sure it's in the rules that you are not allowed to sail through the finish line when you're sailing another part of the course.
Yes, the question is, can you be disqualified without a hearing, or does there have to be a protest?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, okay.
And there is an ongoing debate about whether it is a good idea to allow the race committees to disqualify without a hearing, because sometimes a boat might be obliged to sail through the finishing line because another boat has broken the rule, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, I'm lucky because I sail on the Commodore of Dublin Bay's boat.
Okay.
Some of that I didn't say it actually when I was explaining it, but obviously in neither of these situations does the race committee have to protest. Nothing forces them to. The rules don't say the race committee shall protest, just gives them the option to. So you might ask, well, when would I, or when would I not? And that's really, I mean, it's at the discretion of the race committee. In general, I'd say you would, but some people would say, well, if another boat has protested, say if blue has protested yellow in this scenario, or another boat has protested yellow, there's no need for you to also protest. Or if there's loads of other boats around that have seen it, then you might decide it's not up to you. So nothing forces you to do it. But in general, if nobody else has, I would say it's I don't know, a Gordon or something else. But I'd say that's probably what I would. At high level, like at World Championships and stuff, the race committee will always do it. But at like a lower level sort of events, it's not. You don't necessarily need to. That makes sense. Did we answer your question, Steve? Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think maybe. Mel, I think you've maybe slightly confused it slightly more, because I would have thought as a race officer, when you're trying to keep track of how many laps different boats have done, a boat isn't approaching the finish line until they've done the right number of laps.
So if your question was, so basically you have a course where you basically go in a loop through the finish line at the end of each lap, and then at some point the race officer decides to finish everybody, and your next lap is the one where you're actually finished, and then they just do an average lap time, so you get the time, that sort of thing.
Well, it's the total time after.
So no, it's where you set the course, and you do 2 or 3 laps. Is that right?
Well, what we can do for our club racing is we have, a pair of start-finish lines going each direction, and so you stick a board up to say what the first lap is, and then potentially a different board for subsequent laps until there's a well, they use an F board, but basically until you decide to indicate that it's the finish at the end of that lap. But there's the potential, because the start and finish marks, the two marks are close together, we sometimes get people going around one of them and off on a second lap without actually crossing the other line that is the finish line. So they've done one less lap as such from the point of view of you seeing them cross the finish line at the end of each lap.
Surely, do you have to go through the finish line?
Yes.
It's kind of
It's
like
written into the course that you have to go. So that it's not that they haven't done a lap; it's that they've missed out a mark.
Yeah.
Yes. So the protest is about them missing the mark.
So if I remember, it's like this, isn't it? So you have, I mean, I've watched this finish line enough times. So the club battery is kind of here, and one mark is here, and one mark is here. This is all the water. And this might be the finish mark. So you might be sailing from here, and you want them to go this way and finish. And the finish line is this imaginary line here.
Yeah.
And the problem is some of the boats don't go around this mark properly. They leave it on that side and go this way.
No, it's the reverse, Chris. So they would go round the first mark and then go off on the next lap without actually crossing the finish line mark.
Oh, right, I see, sorry.
And it is defined as a mark on the course.
So if you have defined this second mark as a mark on the course, and they go that way, and leave this to port when they need to leave at the starboard or something, then yeah, they would have not sailed the course properly, because at the end their string would have ended up on the wrong side of one of the marks. So you'd have to protest them.
Can I suggest he sends us a copy, a little illustration, and we'll come back to him.
I think I might have actually written these sailing instructions at one point.
Sorry, can I just ask, in that case there, Chris, where you've just drawn the 3 blue dots?
Yes.
The blue dot closest to the bottom of the screen, that one?
Yes.
Is that a shore?
Yeah, that's on the shore, yeah.
This is the shoreline. This is the club.
Because sorry, Steve, I didn't understand what you were saying at all, but now it makes a little bit more sense.
So there's like a shoreline, and the club battery sits here.
Right.
And then you have these 2 marks.
Okay.
He's saying that the sailing instructions say you have to leave them, say, both on the same side and finish, and the finish line is here. Finish that.
You basically start on one and finish on the other, depending on which way, whether you're going clockwise or anti-clockwise, really, west or east.
So yes, to answer your question, if I've understood it, if you went that way and finished, or if you went like that and carried on, and then at the end of your next lap finished, you would have not sailed the course properly. You would need to be protested. If that makes some kind of sense.
So we'd be looking at the sailing instructions as a jury to see whether it was absolutely clear that you had to leave both marks on the same side, I presume.
Happy to look at them again if you'd like. Okay. Any other questions anyone wants to ask?
No, I just like to thank you all for contributing this evening. It is absolutely wonderful. We're now on about day, whatever it is, 25, 26 of a probable 39, and this is just a wonderful change to the daily humdrum of Zoom with your friends and house party. This is just fantastic. So anyway, well done, and looking forward to case number 3.
Thank you very much. You actually reminded me to say, if you do have any feedback on how you find this or anything we can improve, please email Sarah Louise. You've all got her email address. Send that in, and she can let us know. We'll keep sending out problems. So I think the next one will be.
Actually, I have a final question. There's a lady whose name is Irish Sailing. Who's that?
Sarah Louise.
That's
Sarah
me,
Louise.
Sarah Louise.
Sarah Louise.
The one and only.
Last week it had Harry was my name, so we're not doing too badly.
Are you going to show us the full leaderboard?
So what I will do is I will email all of you with your individual scores and maybe where you are on the leaderboard. I was just conscious of not
embarrassing anybody.
if anybody didn't want to know who we were, or have it public or anything. But we'll certainly email you with your score once I've agreed it with these guys, and let you know where you are in the leaderboard. But you've all done really well. We're really impressed with the answers to this one, actually.
Are we allowed to refer to the rules before we submit our answer?
Oh, please, yeah.
No, because I submitted my answer off the top of my head without looking it up. But
I suppose our goal is to get you more comfortable with looking up the rules, and then if you've looked them up, you will remember it.
Okay, right.
More comfortable with our and you'll have seen through it, and also have a look at the casebook, because there'll always be a case that's relevant.
And on the case books, you can also find the RYA who have a lot of their appeals in a case book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's useful because they have a lot more examples on a lot more weird and wonderful situations than the World Sailing one. So that is a very useful book to read.